Welcome to Aon at the Top, where I have the honor of interviewing some of the most distinguished executives, C-suite, and board members about their journeys and paths to success. I'm your host, Nicole Ward, the Senior Vice President of Sales at Aon. In this series, we draw out meaningful insights and candid perspectives on navigating to the top. At Aon, we help you make better business decisions by turning risk into resilience. Today, we get to welcome Chief Legal Officer Yasmin Saeed Coffey. From Hollywood boardrooms to the front lines of global audio streaming, Yasmin turns complex deals into the soundtracks of our lives. Yasmin is currently the Chief Legal Officer and General Manager of Distribution at TuneIn, one of the world's largest audio streaming platforms, reaching more than 75 million listeners each month. She oversees the company's global licensing strategy, regulatory compliance, and business development efforts, bringing a unique combination of legal acumen and commercial vision to the fast-evolving world of digital media. Her career began in high-stakes entertainment law at Paramount Pictures, where she navigated complex business and legal affairs for a global film powerhouse. Today, Yasmin leverages nearly 2 decades of experience spanning business, media, construction, employment, real estate, securities, and international law to lead TuneIn's growth on the global stage. A graduate of UC Davis with a JD from Brooklyn Law School, she's licensed to practice in California, New York, and Connecticut. Beyond her corporate leadership, Yasmin is active in professional networks like Chief and Tech GC, championing women in leadership and driving conversations on innovation, equity, and the future of media. On Aon at the Top, Yasmin is going to share with us her journey from entertainment law to the C-suite, the art of negotiating high-impact deals, and her vision for the future of audio in a connected world. Yasmin, your background is incredible. I am so thrilled to have you here today and to get to pick your brain and to have you share your story with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's talk, if we could, about early journey and your early influences. You've obviously built an impressive career that bridges entertainment and tech and legal leadership. And I wonder if looking back, what early experiences, either personal or professional, really helped shape your values and your ambition.
I am the eldest daughter of well-educated, intellectually driven, highly motivated parents who have very high expectations. So I think let's start there. But with that said, they were also very present. Both of my parents they worked really hard. They traveled a lot for business, but I cannot recall an important moment in my life where they weren't there. They were also just very involved in my success. There is one experience that sticks with me. When I was very young, my mom decided that I was going to read the newspaper, circle new words, look them up in the dictionary, and then she'd quiz me on them. And I did this for a few weeks, and then I was just over it one day. And so I sat with her, I read an article, and I said, I'm done. And she said, what were the new words you learned? And I was like, there weren't any. And she's like, you knew every word in this article? And so she went through the article and she goes, you know the word panacea? And I did not. And she said, well, it's a cure-all. And that story really resonates with me. I think because, what my mom was trying to teach me was not about the words themselves. It was really like connecting them to ideas and really being able to understand the overall context of everything that I was doing. It also really taught me that that being disciplined is really important, and that if I do the work and pay attention to all of the details, that could help me go really far. And I think that is kind of how I think about things, and I think that is what has shaped my approach to my career.
That's so interesting. I mean, how we do the small things is how we do the big things, right? And I think there's such a great lesson there. How insightful of your mom, right? And to hold you accountable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great lesson. And I wonder, were there other pivotal moments, maybe one or two, early on that sets you on the path towards law, or ultimately into executive leadership?
I went to UC Davis. Like many lawyers, I was pre-med. In my final quarter, I realized I can't stand the sight of blood, and science just didn't seem to come as easily to me as it did for my peers. I believe my parents gave me one of three career choices. The top two were, medicine and law. I eventually chose law school, partly because I wasn't ready to look for a real job. There didn't seem to be much required coursework. And I really love Law and Order. And that is like why I went to law school. Ultimately, I think I'm a far better lawyer than I ever would have been a doctor. I just wish I had realized that before I went through the entire pre-med track OChem series. But that really was one major moment. That's what led me to law school. Then when I started law school, I went to Brooklyn. So I moved across the country. And on my first day of school, which is my orientation day, I learned that my father had passed away. And he was abroad at the time, visiting family. And I considered putting a pause on law school so that I can grieve and be with my family. And my mom said, absolutely not. Education was of paramount importance to my father, and there's no way he would countenance me taking any sort of break for any reason. So I went through that first year of law school just it was a blur, frankly. And I didn't do any of the things I was supposed to do. I didn't go out for moot court. I didn't go out for a journal. And basically, after my last final, I went abroad to be with family and to finally grieve. So I wasn't on a path that naturally led me to where I am now, but all of those things forced me to kind of hustle, I think, a little bit more. So then coming out of law school, I took what at the time was an unconventional path, which is starting at a small firm, which is not, especially at the time, was not the ideal path for a lawyer. But at a small firm, I managed my own caseload. I had to conduct oral arguments, and I had to lead negotiations, second chair trials, all of these things that I never expected to do at that point. I was frequently up against big law attorneys, and there just really there was no time to be intimidated. Separately, I have taken on numerous leadership roles within nonprofit organizations. And, I think the through line with all of these things and all of these roles is, I sort of just did it. I had the skills. When the opportunities came about, I never said no. And so I think each of these discrete experiences were really pivotal in giving me the confidence I needed to be able to step up much earlier than I was comfortable with. And that is just frequently the case in an executive role. We're often required to make decisions before we're ready to. And I think that each of these things has helped me down that path, and also given me like early tastes of what it could mean to be a leader. And yeah.
No, I think, what you said there is so interesting about saying yes. I think so many times, especially for women, where we have that imposter syndrome or that fear of looking bad, or, oh my gosh, will I look good enough? Or can I really do the job? Do I trust myself? Leaning in and saying yes, even when we don't, we might not feel 100% confident. And it sounds like you did quite a bit of that, which has been so helpful and accelerated your career. And you spoke to this a little bit, but in terms of who or what influenced your ambition and the real drive to be in some of these high impact, very visible roles, especially within the entertainment, industry. What were those influences, or who or what were they? And again, you spoke to a little bit, but I didn't know if there was any more clarification around that you might like to add.
I grew up in San Francisco. It's surrounded by pretty driven and successful women. I think, though, that that the one person I always think about is my grandmother, who I actually have never met, but I've heard so much about. She was a labor lawyer in the Philippines. She traveled frequently. She traveled to the States frequently for business. I have a picture of her, like a small black and white photo of her from, I believe, a Boston newspaper at a conference where all 5'2" of her is standing in a sea of dark suits, men in dark suits. And that image really resonates with me because my understanding, what I know of her, is that she was never scared. She just did it. Her presence matters, especially when there's something about her that stands out. She was often the only woman and often the only minority in any room she was in when she was traveling for work. And that didn't dissuade her from continuing to pursue what she was doing. And so for me, just with that influence in mind, I think that has been one of the things that has led me to be drawn to high visibility, high impact roles. Just understanding that it doesn't matter what I look like. I mean, I think between this and the other experiences I had, it doesn't matter that I don't necessarily have a pedigree that you would expect in terms of my, background or professional career. It doesn't matter that I also am 5'2" and often, especially early on in my career, I was the only woman or amongst very few women. That won't stop me from pursuing these roles where I can feel like I can really have an impact.
She sounds incredible, your grandmother. I would love to have her on the show.
I know. Well, she's no longer with us.
I meant it, but that's what an inspiration.
Such an inspiration.
That's incredible. And that must be where your mother got it as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
So.
I'm assuming.
Right. I love that. That's a wonderful story. When we pop out now and think about your sort of career path and the leadership evolution that you've experienced, from your time at Paramount Pictures to your current role as CLO and GM for distribution at TuneIn, your career spans very different corners, right, of the media world. And I wonder, how have you navigated through those transitions and how do you stay adaptable?
I think it's just a necessity. My entire career has been a series of pivots. I mean, even before Paramount, I started out my career as a litigator representing construction companies and real estate developers. And then I pivoted to securities and financial fraud litigation. When I moved to LA, I moved into environmental litigation and then eventually entertainment litigation. And then I went in-house. So when you're in litigation, you're making a lot of quick decisions and pivoting within each case, right? Because they're moving so quickly. And then I had to move across industry. And no, I didn't have to become an expert in these things, but I had to know enough to win my case. So, that is, there are these little pivots even within litigation. And then when I went in-house, I was on the content side of things. I had to learn, I had to not only learn how to be an advocate for the company, I had to learn how to be an operator. And that was just a very different mindset. And so I by necessity, I had to do that. I had to hit the ground running. And then now at TuneIn, I'm on the other side. So I was on the content side when I was at Paramount, and at TuneIn, I'm on the distribution side. So, while I have a greater understanding of the overall ecosystem, digital media, digital, advertising, ad tech, all of these things, like none of this existed, at least in the space I was in at Paramount. So it's just my entire career has been a series of pivots, and it is impossible. It's impossible to be successful unless you really understand the full scope of the ecosystem, because it's really hard. It's really hard to connect the dots unless you can do that. So in terms of like how to adapt, I kind of just do it and I immerse myself. Within our legal team, we support everyone across the business. We support, product, content, revenue, HR, all of the things. And so we meet with them regularly, and it's really not just to understand their priorities and their roadmaps, but to really understand how what they're doing connects to the bigger picture. And so, I think that's really important in order to be successful. It's not just adapting, it's being able to adapt and connect the dots and then take it to the next level.
Yeah. That agility that you're describing, I think it's important in many industries, but I could really see within your career path and within the legal space how critical it would be. What has surprised you the most about leading in this streaming and digital audio space, versus maybe more traditional entertainment?
I think just how fast everything moves. Working for a 100-year-old studio that has, a hierarchy, sometimes very long timelines, very robust playbooks, is very different from working, in this space. TuneIn is a 20-year-old company with a global footprint, but we have a very small workforce. And, we are looking at new businesses every day. And so, we really don't have time to evaluate something over a period of months. A lot of times it's, here's a new opportunity, it needs to launch next week, figure it out. And that's what's made it really exciting too, quite frankly. But that is probably one of the biggest adjustments, is understanding how quickly we have to move. And especially as a lawyer by training, I think naturally we're risk averse, right? And just being able to manage that with the speed at which the business needs us to move has been really surprising, but a really fun one and a fun challenge.
I'd love to pull on that a little bit because I think folks that are listening would be curious, mitigating, towing the line for risk and managing risk for, the company and the firm or that you're with versus that, being able to move, right? So can you say just a little bit more about that for someone who's like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I balance that?
It's not easy, but I think ultimately we can't really operate from a place of fear, but we also can't move so quickly that we end up doing things that are going to cause us problems down the line. And so, when I was a litigator, I learned to hone in on the issues that mattered, that were material to the outcome of the case without getting caught up in the noise. And I think that's what's helped, is understanding exactly what the goal is and figuring out a way to focus on those things without getting trapped in all of the sort of immaterial issues. I think the challenges, especially for lawyers, is we still have to produce very high quality, precise, and thoughtful work. And that is really challenging to do. So I really think it's, bringing people into alignment early is super important. And so that's what we do, is we bring legal and business and product together from the beginning. So we really understand what the goals are from all sides of things. And then we can manage those risks along the way versus, standing up a product, getting it out there, and then having to come back and fix it later. Now it's out there, to many, many users. How do you pull that back? And in our business, which is another thing that surprised me, is the feedback loop is so immediate. We get feedback from our users regularly. We are very data-driven, and we can see in the data when something's working and not working. So we have to pivot very quickly and be prepared to do that. And that's tough, but it's required. And so as much of the work that we can do in advance just helps us mitigate the risks and kind of balance that out down the line.
Wow, it sounds like your background as a lawyer really facilitated your ability to be agile. It's such a theme here, that ability to respond, but yet do it with a holistic appreciation, understanding as a business partner to the other departments, right? There's a balance there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you've, clearly worn the legal hat, to pull on that a little bit more, and a business hat. You've got both of those perspectives, how have both of those, perspectives shaped your leadership style and decision-making when you've had to make what you mentioned earlier, really fast decisions with not always all the information that you'd like? How is the business side of you and the legal side of you, kind of dueled up to help you with decision-making?
Well, they kind of go hand in hand, because ultimately, I think there's always this fear that lawyers are going to block things, and it doesn't help anyone.
That
if
you're the
people
no people?
We're the no people. We try to be the yes.
I've been on the receiving end of that.
Yeah, exactly. And we try not to be the no but we try to be more like, yes, and let's see how we make it work. Because ultimately we have one goal, which is to make the business successful. It's a duty that we owe to our employees. It's a duty that we owe to our shareholders. And as a lawyer, if I'm saying no to new business and new opportunities, that doesn't help anyone. But at the same time, it's my responsibility to make sure that that I'm not leading the company astray. And then from a business standpoint, I want to close a deal and I want to win the business and I want to do that fast, right? Because again, when you have new lines of business and new things happening, it's really important that you're the first one to do it, right? And then you build momentum. And so I do think, in terms of my approach, it's really just, it's that I look at things from both sides. I look at the business opportunity. Think about the ways that we can manage the risk, and I try to do that very quickly. But I try to get buy-in from all of the appropriate stakeholders first, because I think it's really difficult to be successful when you don't have that.
Definitely. And which is a collaboration piece, right? That reaching across the aisle, if you will. When we think about strategic thinking and risk and how those can sometimes not always parallel, you've mentioned that, streaming and media and the whole industry is moving at lightning speed. How do you balance innovation with risk management? Because there is this, like you say, you don't want to be seen as the no person, but there is such a need for innovation, such a need to move. How do you balance that as a leader with your team and across the other C-suite?
I think the goal is to move fast, but in a way that's deliberate and sustainable. And so what we try to do is have very open communication so that everybody has a strong understanding of what the goals are for any initiative. And, I think, again, just trying to get everyone into alignment right off the bat. So everyone has a really strong understanding about the goals, about what the goals are for any initiative and how to move forward. I identify the risks very early. There are acceptable risks and there are, risks that are less acceptable. And we talk through those as a team. We talk about the potential consequences if we move forward anyway. So we really try to kind of, scenario plan and think, okay, well, what are we losing if we don't move towards this opportunity? What are we gaining? What could happen down the line if we don't mitigate a particular risk early? So we really want to make sure, again, that everybody is super aligned right from the beginning, because you can have one, you can move fast and you can innovate, but at where we are in 2025, you can't ignore the risks anymore, right? This isn't like, 2010 and a lot of these platforms were really new and nobody really knew what was happening and there really wasn't a lot of regulation. I mean, we have very robust privacy regulation now. There are lots of advancements with AI and there are regulators that are looking very closely at those things. And so we want to make sure that we are doing things in a way that's just really smart for our business. Again, with the goal being we want a sustainable business.
Yeah, makes sense. Can you share maybe an example of a time where it was a really challenging situation or maybe a particular legal matter that required, a lot of your strategic foresight and creativity to resolve? Can you give me an example maybe of something like that?
I think maybe a challenging experience is in 2020, the company wasn't doing well, and we were ultimately purchased by an existing investor. And this is right in the middle of the pandemic. I hadn't seen my colleagues for months. My kids were at home, and I was meeting with a brand new CEO and board and the rest of the leadership team who were largely brand new, all on Zoom. I was the head of legal. I was elevated to chief legal officer. And then I also took on this role as GM of distribution at the time, almost out of necessity. The business really was struggling, and I was tasked with helping kind of turn this team around amongst, much bigger turnaround. I had to stabilize relationships externally. I had to revive trust internally. And I had to do all of this while finding new opportunities and, making it all work. And that was really, really challenging. And I'm sure that this was a challenging time for everyone. So it was a challenging time. And I really had no one at the time who I felt like I could really bounce ideas off of, because being in this Zoom world was so new and I couldn't see anyone in person. And the only, I had my kids at home, but, my then 3-year-old twin girls and my 5-year-old son were like very cute, but very unhelpful. And so it felt very lonely. But it really taught me resilience. It really taught me how to get organized, because there were so many things that had to be accomplished in such a short period of time. And that has helped me throughout my time at TuneIn.
Yeah, interesting. I think it was a challenging time for everybody.
I know.
Right? I mean, it was, who knew the level to which we could actually produce results via Zoom, deals, acquisitions, things. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, it's also, hiring people.
Yeah.
Right? Hiring people and convincing them to come and work for us, right? That it's going to be an environment that they're going to feel good in, that they are going to be able to make an impact.
Yeah.
It was the first time we really had to do that on Zoom, right? And there was a certain level of trust that we all had to put in, in each other. And I mean, I think that's always the case, but that was never more apparent as it was in that time. And so again, I know I'm not alone in this, but that really just, that forced us all to be resilient, and it certainly forced me to be resilient. And that's been a huge help.
Personally, I moved in the middle in February 2021 from one company to another. And it was a year before I shook the hand of any of the senior leadership team of which I was a part, because it and it was fascinating, to go a year and literally not meet anyone. Crazy.
Well, and isn't it funny when you see them too? And everyone has like a different, I feel like I give off 5'6" vibes, but I'm 5'2". And so when I saw
people were blown away at how short I am. I'm 5'3", and everyone was like, "You're so short." It was the first thing everyone said to me. I was like, "What am I giving off here?"
I know, exactly.
Well, it sounds like we had a very similar experience. I love it. Pivoting, using your word, slightly to sort of thinking more broadly about diversity, inclusion, and mentorship, which I know has been a huge part of your career and your passion. You've navigated, again, all these industries that we've talked about, especially ones that have typically lacked diversity in terms of representation, especially at the executive level. How have you approached breaking barriers for yourself and then subsequently paving the way for others?
Candidly, growing up in San Francisco and being surrounded by, successful women, and then moving to New York and seeing kind of the same thing, I don't think it ever occurred to me that I needed to break a barrier, because there was nothing at the time in my professional career that I felt like I couldn't achieve because I was a woman or because I'm an Asian woman. Of course, now in hindsight, I heard a lot of stories, and I know I'm very lucky, and that's not necessarily the norm. And by the way, I have very much felt the fact that I'm a woman in other areas, but professionally, it didn't really occur to me that was a challenge. But I see it now, I think, again, in hindsight and in some of the interactions I had early on in my career. But I do think having mentors that has always been really helpful to me. I have had very few formal mentors, but I have had so many people that I've relied on and that I've been very comfortable bouncing ideas off of and asking questions. So I really just think it's anytime I felt uncomfortable or was uncertain about something, I always had someone that I can turn to. So mentorship is really important to me. And I think now I I have the opportunity to give some of that back. And so I mentor anywhere from, high school students to people who are very early on in their careers. And the people who I love to speak with the most are kind of the middle of the pack. Not necessarily people who went to the top schools or have the best pedigree or belong to the best clubs or, or have so many resources. I think oftentimes it is those people in the middle who kind of get lost because they don't have enough resources to have things, doors just open for them. And so I really like talking to those people and understanding what motivates them and, really helping them find a path. Mm-hmm. So I just think on both sides of it, it's so important. I benefited so much as a mentee, and I love that I have the opportunity to give some of that back.
It's amazing. And what advice would you give to young women that are aiming for executive positions, be it legal or, a media or tech? Any advice for women that are trying to position themselves?
So there are a couple of things that I always think about. I interviewed Diane von Furstenberg a few years ago as part of a Women's Month event that we did at work. And one of the questions I asked her is, have you ever felt, you mentioned this earlier, have you ever felt like an imposter? How do you deal with imposter syndrome? And she said, what is that word? I don't know that word. Why would you feel like an imposter? Why shouldn't you be here? And that was her answer, right? And I never thought about it that way, right? And then when I was in a previous experience as an early litigator, having to argue one of my first cases, I was wildly intimidated. And one of the partners at my firm looked at me and said, just remember, nobody knows anything about anything. And so both of those things I really think is so important for people early in their career, women in their early career, to keep in mind and understand. And I think, with what Diane said, why shouldn't you be there? So I think it's really not second guessing your abilities is so important because it's really easy to do. Mm-hmm. And I think as women, that is always out there. We always hear women talk about imposter syndrome or not feeling like they belong. And why should we? We have the skills, we have the experience. Why should we? And I think with, my experience at the oral argument, I think that was the partner's blunt way of saying, stop putting people on pedestals. Nobody knows anything. We're all just trying to figure it out.
Yep.
And so do that, figure it out. I think when people graduate from school, at least this was the case for me, I think you have an idea of what you should be doing. So I think women who want to go into media and tech probably have somewhat of an idea of what that may look like to them. But it is really important to understand the entire field as best as you can. And if you want to go into marketing or you want to be a lawyer or you want to create content, that may not be how you get in, but that doesn't make the experience that introduces you to that world any less valuable, and in fact, makes you more valuable down the road. I think now as an executive, I have been on all sides of it. I have litigated, entertainment-related cases and, issues relating to talent and production. I have done content distribution. I am now on the device side of things. I understand the advertising business a lot more. I understand the subscription business a lot more. I started my career representing construction clients. I mean, there's no way, right? But what that helped me, it helped me figure out what I actually wanted to be doing. Not to say that wasn't a great experience, it really was, but it helped me understand what I wanted to be doing. And then it helped me be more comfortable just trying to absorb as much information as I could. Mm. So, I think again, it's put yourself in the room. Don't be intimidated to put yourself in the room, and don't be intimidated or don't feel nervous about entering into an area of the industry that you may not expect, because you don't know where it's going to lead. And ultimately, all of that experience will be so much more valuable down the road. I think when you're in an executive position and you're tasked with operating a business and developing strategy.
I think that's such a great takeaway for the listener, which is, to have that diversity of industry exposure, the diversity of experiences only enriches us and gives us more to draw from and more to pull from later when it comes to challenging situations, right? So that's enriching. So when it comes to sort of your own sort of personal resilience and best practices and habits, what are the things that you do that keep you really grounded? Or do you have practices that you bring to bear when everything around you is going a little crazy? Is there a way that you stay grounded and approach the situations in a calm, centered way?
I don't know that I have the best, habits necessarily, but I try to keep my work life and my home life very separate. I take my job very, very seriously. I take the work that I do very personally. I think that's the only way to be successful. But I really try to ensure that I'm not bringing that home and letting any challenges that I face in the office affect my personal life. I also have a very full life, and that is really helpful. I work a lot of hours. I spend way more time with my work colleagues than I do with my family. So the time that I do spend with my family, and everybody makes sacrifices and they vary, depending on the stage you are in life. So the time that I spend with my family needs to be really meaningful. I need to have a lot of moments where I am laughing, where I am just talking about the Real Housewives. It can't be all serious all the time. And I think being able to have friendships and family and humor and travel and, again, a very full life outside of the office is so important. And that's the only way to feel like, your success that you're achieving at work isn't coming at a really high price personally.
Yeah, I mean, it is to be, a parent, to have the career that you've had, it doesn't come without sacrifice, right? So I think it's, how do we balance it all, And I think a lot of women are trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
What gives, if you will.
I think it's never perfect. Things kind of, it swings depending on where you are. Sometimes work is going to require a lot more, and sometimes your family is going to require a lot more. And I think it's really just looking at the arc of your career and seeing, like, on balance, did I spend the time that I wanted to spend, with my family and my friends? Did I achieve what I wanted to achieve, at work or in my career? And it's not, if we look at it on a day-to-day, I would say, God, I have no balance, right? But if I look at the arc of, my career thus far, or let's break it down. Like, I look at a month out of this year, I think I do have balance, and I think it really is important to take a step back and see it, because I do not think it's possible to achieve like 100% balance, like at every point in your career. Like, there will be points that we have to sacrifice, and it really is just about how much are you willing to tolerate to achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. Yeah. There were nights early in my career, like every lawyer, where, if I left at 6 p.m., it was like, the big joke was I was taking a half day, right?
Right.
But you know what? When I look back at it now, do I regret working that hard? I was in New York City. Everyone was working that hard. You can leave the office at midnight and get a reservation at the brand new hotspot at 1:30, and it was packed. So you know what? I look back and I feel like that was the most fun of my life.
Yeah.
Even though it was also a time when I was working so hard, getting no sleep.
Yeah.
And eating pizza all day.
Almost a badge of honor, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I get it. Very interesting. And I think I would love to hear how you define success. And do you feel that you are a success?
I think it's too early to tell. I think at this point, if I am living true to my values, I think it's really important to be the same person at home that I am at the office. I think it's really important to be an authentic person who has values and who lives those values. And that is that is how I think about being a successful person. And then I think that translates to achieving success in my career as well. Because if I am authentic and I am living my values and I am helping a business grow while being grounded, and building others up and giving them the space to take risks and have a voice, then I am achieving success. Will I say the same thing next year or the following year? I don't know, but I think for right now, that's what success means to me.
And yeah, great answer. I would also love to know if there are any trends or technologies that you think are going to be real game changers for either the legal industry or just your industry overall over the next few years.
I mean, if you've heard it once, you've heard it a million times.
AI, I know.
I really I get goosebumps when I hear that word now. I can't. But it is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it is changing the legal industry as much as it is changing, media. I mean, the things that we can do, for optimization, for content creation, it's just incredible, whether it's good or bad or, it remains to be seen, but it's here. Mm-hmm. I think the legal industry is also changing as a result. There are some incredibly powerful tools out there that, help us work much more efficiently and much faster. Because the technology is able to compare documents much more quickly, digest documents, summarize new regulations. And I think that it's really not something to be scared of. I think it's really important that everyone understands how to live with it, and not really think about the things that, the technology takes away. But I think, a better way to think about it is, what is this technology going to allow me to do? By freeing up the time it would otherwise take me to do this thing.
Yeah.
I hate to be, I feel like a cliche, but it's AI.
Yeah. No, for all the reasons. I get it. Yeah. But I was kind of curious in your take as it relates to the legal industry specifically. So
yeah.
No, very helpful. And I think, obviously, as you alluded to before, you've got a lot of runway ahead of you in terms of, your career. But I wonder if you've thought at all about what your legacy will be, either personally or professionally, or if you have thoughts around that.
I think it's similar to how I measure success right now. I want to be viewed as someone who boosts people up and brings people up and paves the way and helps people and gives them somebody who gives people a voice and an opportunity to step into my shoes. I want to, make sure that I want to be remembered as somebody who has built sustainable businesses that are still thriving long after I've moved on to the next thing. But, again, I also want to be known as somebody who has values that are clear and that I have lived up to.
I think that's great. Well, I'm wondering, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't, or anything else that you'd like to impart or share with the audience before we break?
I think you nailed the questions. I think the one thing that I can leave you with is, the best opportunities have come to me when I've said yes, even before I knew what saying yes meant. And so that is the one thing that has been consistent throughout my career. And so I hope that is helpful for anyone.
I love that.
Who wants to be in this field or this industry.
Yeah. Just to say yes and figure it out.
Exactly.
I love it. I love it. Well, if people wanted to find you, follow you, or, from a social media perspective, or, any particular organizations with which you're involved, anything to speak to there?
I'm on LinkedIn,
Of course,
so that's the easiest. I'm on socials, but I'm private because I post a lot of pictures of my kids. LinkedIn is probably the easiest. Or, my information is all over our website.
I love it. No, that's great. I appreciate that so much. And really appreciate your time, Yasmin. Delightful and super insightful, and appreciate you carving out the time to be with us today. It was great.
Thank you again for having me.
Absolutely.